Good evening. Welcome to the 24th Annual B. Aubrey Fisher Memorial Lecture. Yes, that's good. That's good. Thank you. A little shout out. This is one of the oldest named annual lectures in the College of Humanities, and as you can see from the program, many of the most influential scholars in the discipline of communication have delivered this lecture. This lecture is named after a beloved colleague who, in his too short time on the planet, left an indelible impression on the field and on this department. His work on the pragmatic perspective of human communication is still widely used, and stories of his presence in the department are still frequently told. His infectious laugh still rings in the ears of many of my colleagues. I had the good fortune to meet Aub just once. My then mentor and now friend, Tom Scheidel, who delivered the very first B. Aubrey Fisher Memorial Lecture, introduced me to Aubrey at what must have been the last Western States convention that he attended. The stories of Aubrey told by Tom and by my colleagues get the rendering of a man who loved good ideas. He reveled in the success of his peers and took an unvarnished pride in the accomplishments of his colleagues in the Department of Communication. He liked to be a part of a hard-charging group of scholars who wanted to make a difference in their research, teaching, and public service. I like to believe that Aubrey's heritage is still with us today. I like to believe that more than his laugh lingers in our ears, that we continue to be a group of people who work hard and enjoys each other's achievements. So tonight, we gather again to celebrate this unusual man and his legacy in this department. Before I introduce the introducer, I'd like to take a moment to thank the people who made this evening possible. In particular, I thank Bob Avery, Lexi Kite, and Jennifer Dignan for their hard work on supporting this gathering. This lecture is only possible because, yes, okay, thank you. This lecture is only possible because of the generous support of our contributors listed on your program. And if you've not yet made a donation to this very important lecture and would like to, we'd be honored and pleased to add your name to this list. You are also warmly invited to attend two additional events. Immediately after the lecture, we are hosting a reception in the College of Humanities Lounge at the top of the stairs. And tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in Linco 2120, also at the top of the stairs, Professor Madison will hold an informal seminar entitled The Body in the Field and the Poetics of Critical Ethnography. We hope you will join us for both of these events. And now to the reason that we have gathered here this evening. Professor Mary Strine has been a member of this faculty since 1971. She joined the faculty with Bob Avery and Aubrey Fisher. They were the class of 71, as they like to remind us. Professor Strine is a professor of performance studies and critical studies of communication and one of our very finest teachers. She will be introducing tonight's B. Aubrey Fisher Lecture. Please join me in welcoming Professor Strine to the podium.
Well, it's good to see everyone. Welcome. Public events, such as this annual Fisher Lecture, are celebratory occasions for the living traditions that guide and shape our department. Equally important, they provide opportunities for collective reflection on what is most essential about our present-day academic enterprise. Now, almost 40 years ago, Aubrey Fisher and Dwight Conquergood, a name familiar to some of you. He was then a graduate student. They first met as members of the newly formed Department of Communication. Aubrey's clear passion for engaged scholarship, his genuine appreciation for all facets of the discipline, and his wonderful generosity in mentoring young scholars had a decisive impact on Conquergood's early formation. And notably, Soyini Madison, our speaker this evening, was one of the first graduate students that Dwight mentored when, as a faculty member at Northwestern University, he led the path-breaking transformation of the field of interpretation to that of performance studies. And now a distinguished scholar and teacher in her own right, Soyini Madison is, in a very real and important sense, a carrier of the legacy of Fisher and Conquergood, and a part of the living Utah tradition. Dr. Madison earned her PhD in performance studies at Northwestern in 1989, and taught at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, for 19 years, I believe. She won numerous research and teaching honors and awards during her tenure at UNC, including the Tanner University Award for Outstanding and Inspirational Teaching, the National Communication Association's Spotlight on Scholarship, the J. William Fulbright Senior Scholar Award, and the Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Research Award. In 2006, she returned to Northwestern to join the Performance Studies faculty with joint appointments in African American Studies, Anthropology, and African Studies. Dr. Madison's extraordinary research agenda focuses on the intersections of local activism, the political economy of human rights, and indigenous performance tactics. With performance clearly in the forefront as subject matter and method, she has set the benchmark for activist research in performance studies. Her most recent, highly engaging book, I recommend, Acts of Activism, Human Rights, and Radical Performance, is based on her extensive field work as a Fulbright scholar in Ghana, West Africa, where she immersed herself in the local culture and collaborated with local activists in their daily struggle for women's rights, water democracy, and economic justice. Dr. Madison is best known and admired among communication scholars for her highly innovative work in critical performance ethnography, as she translates and directs her ethnographic data for the public stage. It is through her public staging of ethnographic data that principles of advocacy, publicity, and ethics are powerfully examined in her published work. In Madison's own words, entering a public space enlivens scrutiny, enlarges responsibility, and cracks open into plain sight hidden wrongs. Now, Madison's current research focuses on the performance tactics of particular transnational labor union movements within the Black diaspora, and on oral histories of union leadership that reflect specific public demonstrations of labor justice and disputes. She plans to examine the Black diaspora labor movements in Great Britain, Kenya, South Africa, and the United States. Her lecture this evening, Performance, Human Rights, and the Dignity of Labor, will be drawn from the preliminary research of this project. It is with great pleasure and honor that I'd like to introduce Professor Soyini Madison.
You know, it's hard to express what it means for Professor Mary Strine to introduce me. She has been an intellectual resource, moral resource, a resource for what it means to truly do social justice work since my beginning days in graduate school. She was the mentor to my mentor. So it is with great heartfelt thank you and appreciation I extend to you for that introduction. Actually, since I've just completed the book on my Ghana research, this is the very, very first time I'm sharing my work on labor. So I am right at the beginning stages, and this certainly is a testing ground. So it's good to be here. Then a plowman said, "Speak to us of work." And he answered, saying, "You work that you may keep pace with the earth and the soul of the earth. Always you have been told that work is a curse and labor a misfortune. But I say to you that when you work, you fulfill a part of earth's furthest dream assigned to you when the dream was born. And in keeping yourself with labor, you are, in truth, loving life. And to love life's labor is to be intimate with life's innermost secret. Gahil Gibran, excerpt from The Prophet, 1923. You know, to tell you about maid work, I reckon I really can't say much about it. I just know people think maid work is like being a slave, a servant like that. Seem to me any job you get, you gotta serve somebody. You serve your children, you teaching at that school, ain't you? Yes, ma'am. If you're a doctor, you serving the sick. If you're a preacher, you serve in the church. Seem to me you got a job making money. You gotta be serving something. Everybody serving somebody that's working. I feel when you serve somebody's house, that's a big service. Where you live at, it's important, ain't it? Yes, ma'am. Well then, interview with Elma Capper, sharecropper and domestic worker in 1983. I am fighting hard to win a contract. I'm fighting hard for social justice for everyone here. I'm fighting hard for justice for all these workers. Mercedes Avoir at the picket line of the longest strike in the United States, the Congress Hotel in Chicago, Illinois. I am 51 years old. I lost my job last fall when the company I worked for folded. I have sent out resumes, posted on every job site I can find, and I get no response. I have lost my home. I have been scrapping on unemployment, and now that's gone too. This is now getting desperate. There is no work. There's just no work. There's no work. James Smith, unemployed factory worker in Detroit. What I want to do tonight is present a paper in 3 modes, or registers, or trajectories. I want to begin with the tensions between the labor rights movement discourse and the human rights movement discourse. Then I want to move on to philosophies of labor, materialism, temporality, and utopia. And in between those kind of registers, I want to also share with you what hopefully will be or culminate in a stage performance. So I invite you to travel along with me, not with a narrative speech with a clear beginning, middle, and end, but kind of landing points, modalities, a kind of weaving and texturalities, a kind of hypertext of these 3 registers. Labor rights, human rights. Union and labor scholar Kevin Colbrin, speaking primarily from the position of human rights law, states, and I quote, "Labor movements do not necessarily benefit from the legalism, elitism, or the individualistic and philanthropic frames that often define human rights approaches to workers' rights. The international human rights movement is not fundamentally committed to examining and questioning fundamental economic relationships in society, nor is it committed to direct action as a method. or workplace democracy as a goal, to the same extent as the labor rights movement, unquote. To whatever extent this might be true, that labor rights activists want to take advantage of what he calls the hegemonic status of human rights discourse and the effectiveness of certain human rights strategies, there has been much criticism of unions and labor rights organizations in that it is said they seek special rent-seeking economic interest, and that work and these interests work to the benefit of memberships and members to the detriment of the economy as a whole. Another criticism is that they are corrupt and self-serving in that they work for the interest of members rather than the greater good of the economy. The negative perception of unions has compelled many in the labor movement to attempt to redefine itself within a framework that has obtained widespread intellectual, cultural, moral, and political support, and that is the human rights movement. Calling a particular right a human right is both law and popular discourse, makes that right almost, according to Kalbrin, numinous. Framing labor rights as human rights thus shifts the labor discourse from wages and special interest politics to ethics and morality. In other words, activists and labor law scholars seek to harness the hegemonic discourse, according to Kalbrin, the hegemonic status of human rights discourse in order to gain public support for a number of legal, political, and strategic objectives. Kalbrin and others warn of the tensions between human rights discourse and strategies and the discourse and strategies of labor rights. And they warn that there must be caution in linking human rights and labor rights. I want to argue that caution may be necessary in promoting certain linkages between labor rights and human rights movements, only because in many cases a false dichotomy exists between the two, as well as a narrow and limited view of the purpose, scope, and vision of each. The caution argument rests on certain general concerns. First, human rights are primarily oriented toward limiting the power of the state, and labor rights are primarily oriented toward limiting the power of private actors in the market. 2, human rights is more concerned with individualism, and labor rights more concerned by collectivity, freedom of association, and collective bargaining. 3, human rights is more philanthropic and has a more philanthropic approach. We are here to help you. Labor rights, a more self-determined approach. We are collective agents of our own destiny. And 4, human rights lean more towards civil and political rights, taking up torture, imprisonment, free speech, failed states. And labor rights more toward economic justice, social rights, full and productive employment by virtue of being human. Now, having done human rights work in the global South, the kind of human rights discourse that's situated in the law and legislation is very different in the US than it is in Ghana. Now let's turn the page on these assertions. There are many of us who understand the caution but are recasting the rights movement, reaching beyond these dichotomies and taking up a more expansive view of human rights, where law is inseparable from philosophical and performative interventions that augment civil and political rights with economic justice, where critiques and interventions upon neoliberalism are integral to our agendas. There are those of us in the labor rights movement who are taking a wider view of work to include informal work and non-traditional work, who are reinvigorating the movement, the early labor rights movement, by seeking solidarity across communities and borders beyond demands of only fair wages to include health care, political and civic participation and equity, what Joel Handler calls rights of exhortation, the assertion of one's self-worth and entitlement over one's role in society, unquote. This to me means fair wages, but it also means full citizenship. It means work, but it also means the opportunity to do the work that lifts our soul. It means to reach for the performativity of the utopian, not as a nowhere perfection, but as a possibility that everyone should be, can be, guaranteed work. Because to labor constitutes the human condition. To labor is a human right. Like clean water, I would argue, like the air we breathe, I would argue, it is to keep pace with the earth. We all must have labor, and we all must have the opportunity to labor. Transition. 2. What do I mean by labor? By labor, I mean a mental and/or physical task, i.e., an assigned or designated effort toward a material end or towards economies of invention, purpose, and survival. By labor, I mean a great effort emanating from and toward materiality that ironically encompasses imagination and futurity. By labor in this instance, I mean work, but also the ontology of work, as well as its poetic experience and imaginings about itself. By labor, I mean the possibilities for thinking in terms of the utopian, the here, the now, the future in this place and everywhere no place. I also mean contemplating existential drudgery, like Sisyphus, unending hell, the cruel destiny of repetitions and torturous burdens. I do not mean to fetishize or romanticize work. By labor, I mean work and that which both entails work but exceeds work, the work of the brain and the work of the body that is both separate and inseparable under the infinite temporalities of labor. By labor, I mean a job and its resonances, that is, something that one must get done, and the emotional affect, material context, and shared belonging that give it form and make it integral to what it means to be human, that make our access to and need for labor a human right. Like reflection, labor becomes truly critical, according to Chang, when it is shared. This speech, I hope tonight, represents what it means to labor, what that means as a human right, and what that means in terms of the materiality and the futurity of our worlds. Branko G. Shang sums it up this way, quote, labor matters. It cuts and cuts into matter, the mother of all. To labor is to affirm life, which begins with labor, inasmuch as the fact of labor is that with it life begins and goes on. The truth of life is that labor defines, that is, makes finite, much of what we do and are in life. That labor, having always and already begun, survives its own manifold articulations, including all that seeks to negate it. The transition from one type of labor to another thus not only brings a change in the forms of life in which one finds oneself, it also demands a change of the lenses through which one views history that is just past and one's own place in the history that is now unfolding, unquote. And wonderful forum, if I can just interject something here. Communication and Critical Cultural Studies, publication of the NCA. It's the forum on labor that I draw from. It's a plug for that edition. 3, performance. When you get performance studies people up to the podium, you can always bet there's going to be some kind of performance somewhere in the speech. So here we go. This is the best part for me. This is where my activism rests in public performance. This is what brings it all together. There's nothing like the metaphor. A woman enters from upstage left. She is trying to make her way downstage, past a throng of human shadows, figures circling the stage. These shadows are now walking from left to right and right to left. The shadows seem desperate. They are searching for something. Oblivious to the woman, this desperate search is all that they know. The woman is able to move past the shadows and sit down stage. She welcomes the audience with a playful demeanor. It is a striking contrast to the searching shadows upstage. The woman speaks as the shadows continue to move in slow motion, still searching. Never cross a picket line. These were the words I uttered. I think they were the first words I uttered. Never cross a picket line were words as sacred in my house as Father, Son, and Holy Ghost were in other homes. Crossing a picket line was like crossing over into some strange abyss where you'd kind of turn in your membership card to ever being right about anything ever again. You were always destined to be wrong if you crossed that picket line. She freezes. Some shadows now upstage seem to be falling to the ground. Projected above the shadows is a large screen. It is gray. It is filled with earth and dirt, a kind of hollowness. The figures seem as though they are tired and sick. There are other shadows holding them up, helping them walk through the journey, through the search. There are shadows that fall and do not rise. They lay still and motionless. Lights up on the girl, on the woman. My father was a union man. He was the president of the Hotel Servers Workers Union Local 593. He was also a father who sang to us at night about pretty white horses and cradles that rocked. He was also the best Louisiana cook there ever was and made the best gumbo I've ever tasted still. He was a husband who wanted my mother to stay home and take care of the girls in her garden. She grew tulips. But my father was a union man. That is what he really was. All else might have been just as important or more important. But it was being a union man that was his saving grace. She freezes. lights up, upstage on the shadows. There are only a few shadows left, still walking and searching. They are holding on to each other as if it is only each other and the desperate search that keeps them all from going under. But suddenly, they stop. They all just stop. One shadow begins to dig deep into the ground. The large screen projected upstairs sees, focuses on the digging. One shadow begins digging deep in the ground. This single silhouette suddenly continues to dig, ravaging, digging, with a fierce urgency. The others now fall to the ground. All the shadows, all of them, are now digging. Lights up on the woman. My father used to say, there are no bad people, not really. There are only people without opportunities. Before he was president of the union, my father was a waiter. He waited tables at the Sherman Hotel at night and sold newspapers during the day. He'd come home, change clothes, and leave out again in his big black jacket and white shirt. Every night, he and my mother would count his tips. The tips paid my tuition at St. Edmund's Episcopal Grammar School, and it paid for me and my sister to have winter coats. The woman freezes, lights up on the shadows. As the shadows dig into the ground, on the projector, a small spring begins to sprout. It is water. A small spring of blue water is projected on an upstage screen. The bodies dig faster, they keep digging, and the small spring grows larger and larger. The screen is now a surging force of blue water. The shadows taste the water, drink in it, play in it, bathe in the water, come alive again in the water. My father said he was a labor man because to labor is to be human. He said he was a labor organizer because to labor with dignity was to be civilized. He always said your labor should be your ticket to freedom, not the doorway to slavery. The stage is black. 4. Monday, October 18th, 2010, New York Times, Robert Wright. Quote, "It's a perfect storm, and I'm not talking about the impending dangers facing Democrats. I'm talking about the dangers facing our democracy. First, income in America is now more concentrated in fewer hands than it's been in 80 years. Almost a quarter of total income generated in the United States is going to the top 1% of Americans, according to Wright. The top 1/10 of 1% of Americans now earn as much as the bottom 120 million of us." He asked, who are these people? They're top executives of big corporations and Wall Street hedge fund managers and private equity managers, he says. They include the Koch brothers, whose wealth increased by billions last year and who are now funding Tea Party candidates across the nation. Most Americans are in trouble. Their jobs, incomes, savings, and even homes are on the line. The perfect storm, he says. An unprecedented concentration of income and wealth at the top, a record amount of secret money flooding our democracy, and a public becoming increasingly angry and cynical about a government that's raising its taxes, reducing its services, and unable to get back to work. Unable to get back to work. We're losing our democracy, he says, to a different system. It's called plutocracy. 5. I am interested in how the right to labor can make a material difference. How can it make materiality and also unmake it? How can it do that this time for our future? If, as Shang states, matter is the mother of all, the proposition that physical matter is the ultimate reality, and that all existence, including consciousness, affect, and ideology, emanate from the overarching dynamics of matter, or more precisely, political economy of physical phenomena and existence. The core idea, motivated primarily by contributions of Marx and Engels, is that human behavior in society is fundamentally shaped by the social and technical organizations of economic production and exchange. Obviously, the processes of social change can never be attributable to culture, knowledge, or ideas isolated from the material conditions of human life, or in the way economic activities and arrangements are then valued, rewarded, and organized into the sociality of space and time. For me, the question becomes, what do we do now? I believe that we need to think about the nature of labor and that it should be a right, that everyone should have the right to labor, the right to a job, that is, the right to a different way that materiality is now thought, valued, constructed, and governed. I know that this moment is not all there is, Mr. Wright. I see his warning as a warning that is saturating this present moment, but is a plea grounded, hopefully, in futurity. Temporality, to be temporal, is defined as or relating to limitation and limited by time, worldly, secular, characteristic of or devoted to the temporal world as opposed to the spiritual world, lasting only for a time, not eternal, passing through our temporal existence, of or relating to time as opposed to eternity, of or relating to earthly life, of or relating to grammatical tense or a distinction of time, of or relating to time as distinguished from space, of or relating to the sequence of time to a particular time, to a particular chronology, the temporality. This is what we have. This is where we are now. But we want more. We want more than the now. What should, what must, what is most desirable to come after this presentness? The question begs for a better future than what is now in this present. I turn to theories that equate the future with the utopian. Performance studies scholar Jose Munoz states, quote, "Something that should mobilize us, push us forward. Utopian is not prescriptive. It renders potential blueprints of a world not quite here, a horizon of possibility, not a fixed schema." In citing Theodor Adorno and Herbert Marcuse, Munoz states that, quote, "Utopia is primarily a critique of the here and now. It is an insistence that there is, as they put it, something missing in the here and now," unquote. If the utopia is within a present that pushes us toward a multiplicity of possible futures, alternatives, and potentialities, then this becomes a hope for a better world. Munoz goes on to state, But in this instance, I dwell on hope. That's familiar. I dwell on hope because I wish to think about futurity and hope. I wish to think about futurity and hope. I argue this is an emotional modality that permits us to access futurity par excellence, unquote. This emotional modality I locate, Soyini Madison locates, in the performative. Maybe we can find art in our future, after all. In the inner animating relationship, think about it, art and futurity. We've always done so. For Felix Deleuze, art can function as, quote, lines of flight, unquote, a signifying and material, unending force that both traverses and combines individual and collective subjectivities and desires, challenging common sense and normativity as it pushes it to the limit in its combinations and refigurations. Oh gosh, that sounds luscious. The connective, expansive, and deterritorializing character of lines of flight, when considered in terms of art, quote, draws our attention to the ethical dimensions of art, what art makes possible, what it enables us to broaden, how it enables us to broaden our horizons, our understandings, sensitizing us to our own affective dimensions in relation to the world as a whole. And what does this have to do with labor? It is this move from Munoz toward a utopian aesthetics that, quote, fuels the political imagination, unquote. And that's what I am pleading for, begging for, to fuel the political imagination. Does the labor of enacting a politics of futurity open up something different? Can we all be civilized? Labor as civilization, as a right? I think we're on either 5 or 6. I hope you're taking better notes than I am. The performance. In celebration of communication and critical cultural studies, these are the introductions, these are the director's notes. In celebration of communication and critical cultural studies, March 2010, Forum on Labor, under Branko G. Chang, editor. We set it to stage with a bit of tweaks and revisions here and there. The woman, she's down stage center. The woman speaks. She moves in and out of different characters. 5 performers, each holding a large, overly determined book that says labor. The performers are sitting on 4 different platforms. She moves about like a dancer. She is a dancer. She assumes various characters between the textual reading. The text reads, the character dances. The woman speaks. My grandfather was an Indian Negro. He knew how to work with his hands. He say, give me your rags. Just give me what you don't need. He used to make rugs out of those rags, yeah. He'd hang them on the pole, and then he'd make rugs, and people would come and buy them. He could make corn shucks out of baskets. You know, everybody wanted to buy my grandfather's baskets. Performer 1, from the book Labor. The financial meltdown may well deliver on a plate the easy-to-exploit working conditions that employers have pushed long and hard for. The dancer, the woman, moves through the platform. She is now an older gentleman, and he speaks. Downstage left. I worked at the Ford plant for 20 years. It was the place I knew. It was what I did. We were family. It is gone, like part of me is gone. It is not just the wages, but my life. It was the routine of my life, like an extended family. My family is gone. I need to rethink time and what a day, just what a day now really means. She stops, now moving to performer 2 with the book, Labor. If and when jobs reappear, they have to look less like lottery tickets. Everyone should have a right to choose their own balance of freedom and security and employment, and we should craft policies to ensure that making the wrong choices does not prove catastrophic. The dancer. She moves past the performer with the book and moves up to performer 3. She is now someone yet different again. I hate my job. I watch the clock until time passes. I want to feel what it's like to love what you do. To do the work, like Alice Walker says, the work your soul must have. I wanted to work and know that the work I have done means something, that I am worth something. She stops at performer 3. Labor. The people formerly known as employees, for those who answer to that description, are increasingly thin on the ground. Can they learn how to behave like stewards of people's livelihoods by committing to workers in the long term? The dancer moves past performer 3. She's now at performer 4. She's turned into another character, a young black man. If you don't have a job, then how you gonna be a man? I've been looking for a job over a year. I don't feel like a human being. I can sell drugs. That's what some of my friends do. That's just what they do. Where do you go when you don't have a job? Performer 5. Labor is central to humanity. Stage is black. 6. Why do performance? Why do it? Why do it here? When temporality, i.e., what Stuart Hall calls the problems that beset our world, unquote, are joined with the performative, we can trick material time. We can outlaw chronology. We can delimit the boundaries of presentness, and in the process, something gets done. According to Richard Schechner, we enter, quote, encounters in the realm of doing, unquote. We pursue a through line of action. That's the definition of what a performative really is. What the performative of temporality allows is for us to do the labor of reflexivity, discombobulating our earthly time in order to embody 2 time zones or more at once. Adding performance to temporality changes it. It can now play into the realm of the future and tease the fixity of a specific time with its location for the purpose of a performative through line of action. Performance is always about the alchemy of living in multiple time zones. Performance allows us to name and narrate, use it, perhaps even exploit it, beyond our own musings toward a rhetoric of materiality and an aesthetics of futurity that opens the potentialities of what human labor can do and invent for the right to be human now in the unfolding of history. we begin the question, what are some of our alternatives? Thank you.